Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you Dr. Robert George and Dr. Cornell West.
Thank you very much for Now, I'm sure the first thing you're wondering is which one of us is Robert George and which one is Cornell West. We're going to keep you guessing. But I know that I speak for Brother Cornell as well as myself in saying how delighted and how honored we are to be with you this afternoon at the Air Force Academy. And we're grateful to all of you for taking time out of your day to come and be with us. Let me also express on behalf of both of us our gratitude for the commitment that you have made to serve and defend our country. We greatly appreciate that, and it makes it a very special honor for us to be here to share some of our own ideas, especially about leading the examined life and leading the committed life with you. I want to say for myself just what a pleasure it is, as it always is, to be here with my dear brother, Cornell West. I have learned so much from these conversations that Cornell and I have had going back to 2007 when we first began getting to know each other and conversing in a serious way, and then began teaching together, seminars on the great works of the Western tradition, beginning with Sophocles' Antigone and going all the way up into the 20th century, leading our students through discussions of writers like C.S. Lewis and John Dewey and Martin Buber, and then taking them back all the way to the Greeks, to Sophocles and Plato and Aristotle and the great thinkers of our tradition from which the two of us, or from whom the two of us have learned so much. But it's not just that I have learned a great deal from Cornell. I have been inspired by him. I'm a conservative. Cornell is not a conservative. But if any of you happen to know or can find one of my fellow conservatives who has as much integrity as Cornell West, will you introduce him or her to me? Because I would like to know anybody who has that kind of integrity. And that inspires me. I'm sure it's inspired many of you. Irrespective of your ideological or political or philosophical or even religious outlook, there are certain virtues that all the great traditions of thought, religious and secular, there are certain virtues that all affirm, acknowledge, recognize. And one of those is integrity. Saying what you mean, meaning what you say. Standing fast on principle. Sticking to the truth as best you are enabled to understand the truth. Refusing to be deflected from the truth. Refusing to go silent. Refusing to fail to stand for the truth as best you understand the truth because of fear or because of what's on offer by way of personal advancement or aggrandizement in return for going soft on the truth or going silent on the truth or refusing to stand up for the truth. Integrity in human affairs is always in short supply because we frail, fallen human beings are always vulnerable to the temptations to sacrifice integrity for something else or to give it up out of fear. Integrity requires other virtues like courage. Those virtues themselves are in short supply. So we all need to learn to honor integrity when we see it and to emulate it wherever we can find it. Whether the person exemplifying it happens to agree with us in the domain of politics or philosophy or ideology or religion or not. And I find it exemplified so powerfully and wonderfully in Cornell, which makes it an honor for me to teach with him in the classroom and to go around the country as we're doing today, talking with especially young men and women like you about matters that are of common concern to the two of us. Now, let me begin my contribution to this conversation this afternoon by reminding you of just a small number of things that you infallibly know. And the first of those things is that you and I, and even Brother Cornell, all of us are fallible. Few things we know infallibly. One of them is we are fallible. We are frail, fallen human beings. We have minds. Our minds have the capacity to attain truth, and yet we are imperfect. Our intellects are imperfect. We will get some things wrong. We have no guarantee. None of us has any guarantee that we will always be right, or even often be right. So I think it's important to begin discussion of any serious issue with a recognition that we could be wrong. Wherever we happen to stand at the moment, entering into the conversation, we could be wrong. Now let me remind you of something else you know. Every single one of us, on any issue that is in debate in our public life today, every single one of us knows, as a matter of brute fact, that there are reasonable people of goodwill, people just as reasonable as I myself or you, just as well informed, just as well disposed, who sees things differently than I do or you do. Each of us entering into a conversation with another person needs to begin with that recognition. If we fail to do that, we have fallen into the vice of dogmatism, assuming our own infallibility, assuming that no one could disagree with me unless they were unreasonable, stupid, ignorant, bigoted, or suffer from some other personal failing or defect. No, we know, all of us know, that there are reasonable people of goodwill, well-informed, well-disposed people who disagree with us. That's true if we're on the left, that's true if we're on the right, that's true if we're in the middle, that's true if we're somewhere off the spectrum. We know that there are reasonable people of goodwill who disagree. And then a third and final thing that we all know. We all know that there are some beliefs we now hold, each and every one of us, all of you. If there are any exceptions, I'd like you to raise your hand and identify yourself, because I'd like to know such a person. But all of us, I think, realize that right here and now, I hold some beliefs that are incorrect, that are false, that are not true. Each of us knows that. Each of us knows that right here and now, not everything we believe is true. The trouble, of course, is we don't know which things aren't true. If we knew which of the things we believe are not true, we would change our beliefs. With respect to any particular belief, we believe it because we believe it's true. We hold it because we believe it's true. So if we go belief by belief through all our beliefs, we would say, yeah, I think that's true, yes, I think that's true, yes, I think that's true, and we would have the full universe of our beliefs. And yet we know if we step back and look at our body of beliefs as a whole, we know because of our fallibility. And we're reminded, because reasonable people of goodwill do disagree with us, that there must be some beliefs that we hold that are wrong, that aren't true. And if we ourselves are reasonable people of goodwill, if we ourselves are people who value truth above our own opinions, then we want to move from error, wherever we happen to be in error, to truth. We want to know what those false beliefs, those erroneous beliefs, those incomplete beliefs, those inadequate beliefs are, so that we can change our minds and bring our thinking into greater conformity with truth, get nearer and nearer to the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But notice what follows from that. What follows from that is our recognition of the need to listen attentively and with an open mind to reasonable people of goodwill who disagree with us, because they represent our best hope of moving from error, wherever we are in error, to truth. And two well-disposed interlocutors who, whatever their differences, love truth above opinion, would rather be proven wrong than remain in error. Those two interlocutors are bound together in a common project that is more important and profound than whatever the beliefs are, even if they're very important beliefs, that divide them. In fact, that common bond of truth-seeking, that recognition that we need each other in this common project, those of us who disagree need each other in the common project of correcting error, getting nearer to truth, can become, as it has become for Brother Cornell and for me, the foundation, the solid, rock-solid foundation of a deep friendship, of love for each other. Now that requires those virtues that I talked about earlier. Open-mindedness, willingness to listen, recognition of one's own fallibility. And as Cornell has reminded audiences in many places, it also does require courage. Let me tell you why it requires courage. We frail, fallen human beings are naturally vulnerable, and we don't like to be vulnerable. We don't like the feeling of vulnerability. It's a bad feeling. But when we open ourselves up to another person in discussion, in debate, in argument, we render ourselves vulnerable. If we do it in an open-minded way, now if we're dogmatists, if we're just going in with our fists up, bound and determined we're never going to change our mind under any circumstances, that the whole point of this debate is victory, the whole point of this debate is to defeat the other guy, well, then you're not vulnerable. But that's useless. That's not going to get you anywhere near the truth or bring you to a recognition of errors where you are in error. To do that, you need that openness that makes you vulnerable. And since we don't like vulnerability, it takes courage to be willing to become vulnerable. It takes courage to open ourselves up to being proven wrong, to have to change our minds. We'd rather just stick where we are. To be willing to be vulnerable takes a kind of courage. Now, behind that, you'll notice, is another fact about human beings. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, what I'm about to say. In lots of ways, it's a good thing, but with a downside. So what's the thing? The thing is this. We human beings, for better and for worse, tend to wrap our emotions around our convictions. We don't just believe things. We emotionally invest in our beliefs. When we have a belief, we make a commitment to it, we emotionally invest in it, we don't want it to turn out to be wrong. That's emotionally unsettling. Now, I say it's not a bad thing because it works for human well-being that people invest emotionally in their convictions. If we didn't, nothing would ever get done. Dinner wouldn't get cooked. The children wouldn't get bathed and clothed and sent off to school. Great causes of justice, human rights, the common good wouldn't get served. Worship wouldn't happen. Business couldn't get done. We need the emotional impetus and motivation to act on our beliefs. Otherwise, they would just be beliefs, bare beliefs, but not really with much power to motivate. So wrapping our emotions around our convictions is not bad in itself. But as I say, it has a downside. Because if we wrap those emotions of ours too tightly around our convictions, we will become dogmatists. We will be unable to actually open ourselves up to the possibility that we need to change our minds, open ourselves up to critique, open ourselves up to engagement with another person. And notice, again, that the kind of engagement that I'm talking about here that is so critical is not just politely listening to another guy. That's not it. If that's the best we can do in a society as polarized as ours, I would take it. It's better than throwing rocks at each other, or worse. It's not good enough, though. Just being tolerant, just being willing to listen, or to hear without listening, really listening, that's not going to get us where we need to go. No. Engaging with another person means seriously considering the possibility that what he says is true and what I believe is false and needs correction, or maybe partly false and in need of correction. There's a difference between just politely listening and truly engaging. If you're politely listening, you're in no risk of being unsettled. You're in no risk of changing your mind. And if you're in error, you're in no risk of being brought near truth or nearer to truth. But if you're engaging in a serious way, then you're vulnerable, then you're open, then you're going to be unsettled. And when things settle back down, they might not be settled in your own head just the way they were before you listened to that intelligent, thoughtful, well-informed, well-disposed person who sees things a little differently, or maybe a lot differently, than you do. Now, I'll just conclude on this point. I think conversation is probably the best way of moving forward toward truth. But that conversation can take place not just between two living human beings sitting in a room together, either in front of a big audience, or as Cornell and I have done many times in a hotel room late at night over a glass of red wine. That's great, and in my book, that's the best. But it can take place in a conversation, a kind of conversation with a dead writer. It can take place with a conversation, entering into a dialogue, engaging with Socrates through Plato's dialogues, or with Sophocles, or with St. Augustine, or with Marx, or with Mill, or with Hayek, or with Dewey, or with C.S. Lewis, or with Martin Buber, with Elizabeth Anscombe, with Jane Austen in literature. It doesn't have to be philosophy. Engaging with someone who has something to say, who may challenge and unsettle, can happen even if that someone has been in the grave for centuries. And then finally, that conversation can take place and will take place if we have formed ourselves properly through our reading, through our dialogical engagement with others. That conversation will take place in our own heads. A truly well-educated person A person who's had the experience of what Brother Cornell calls paideia, deep education, not just learning information and developing skills, but actually a deep engagement with ideas. Such a person will be his or her best critic, his or her best interrogator. He or she will live an examined life, a life in which he or she is examining his or her convictions, beliefs, values, whether or not there's an interlocutor. That conversation will be going on mentally. One will even unsettle oneself from time to time, raising issues about one's beliefs and values and commitments. Now, is that attitude of self-examination, is that stance of leading the examined life compatible with a life of commitment like the life that you have chosen for yourselves? You've made a profound commitment already in your youth, a profound commitment to the institution of the Air Force, to this country, to serving this country. Is it possible to make and maintain that kind of commitment while being willing to question one's fundamental beliefs and values and have them questioned all the time? We'll say more about that in this conversation and then later today in some smaller conversations. But Cornell and I have invested our own lives in the idea that that is possible. We try to lead examined lives that are also committed lives. We both make commitments. Cornell goes to jail sometimes for his commitments. I haven't done that. I have offered to bail him out of jail.
Oh, yeah. We appreciate that too. Appreciate that too. Oh, yes, that's true.
But we've made commitments. We've been willing to pay prices for what we believe. And we think it's possible to make those kinds of commitments while still living an examined life. But more on that to come. Cornell?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's just give it up for our dear brother.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, indeed. Indeed. I first want to say that I am deeply blessed to be in this place and to be in dialogue with my very, very dear brother. It's been now 11 or 12 years. We look forward to another 15 or 20. I think it's very important, not just to talk, but to exemplify the undeniable fact that love is not reducible to politics, that friendship is not reducible to whether you agree with someone on a set of policies, that you can revel in the humanity of another person, no matter what color or gender or sexual orientation, no matter what national identity, if you have enough willingness to be vulnerable, so you learn and listen. And so I have a deep love for my brother. It goes far beyond the fact that he thinks I'm wrong about some things, and I know he's wrong about that. I'm just kidding. That we learn from one another, that we attempt to see where we overlap. He's been an exemplary figure in terms of defending religious liberties all around the world, and it's something that I'm deeply committed to. He's concerned about poverty. I am too. He's a bit more in love with free markets. I appreciate markets, but I believe in serious regulations when it comes to justice, that it tilts toward the poor and working peoples and so forth. So we can go on and on about the ideological and the political differences, and they are real, but they in no way foreclose the genuine human connection. And that is what we need so badly these days. I believe that we're living in a moment of escalating spiritual blackout. What I mean by that is the relative eclipse and collapse of commitments to integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, and willingness to learn and listen. And that can only lead toward more moral emptiness and spiritual vacuity in terms of ourselves as human beings, let alone no democracy, And every democracy we know is fragile, very, very precious. It can slide down a slippery slope to chaos if you don't have fellow citizens committed to integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, and putting something bigger than themselves. Now, I'm mindful of the fact that I'm here at this grand institution that is fundamentally committed to what? The motto, integrity first. Oh, boy, that's a strong claim, isn't it? Service before self. Oh, that's another strong claim. Excellence in all things. Oh, my God. What the Greeks call arete, A-R-E-T-E. Excellence in all things, spiritual excellence, moral excellence, political excellence, athletic excellence, military excellence. What a grand regulative ideal of an institution that's not yet 75 years old. Thank you, Dwight Eisenhower. Appreciate your leadership. And I do want to acknowledge the leadership of this institution. I followed closely the words of your courageous superintendent, and I was deeply affected by what he said in terms of his commitment to integrity, honesty, and decency. And the leaders that I've met here thus far, Brother Chris, Brother Mark, Brother Adam, and the others, are persons who have been so welcoming to me, as well as Brother Robbie. I begin with a situating of myself in a particular tradition that I acknowledge I bring with me in any dialogue with yourselves, with Brother Robbie, and what have you, you see. That I am who I am because somebody loved me, and somebody cared for me, and somebody deeply attended to me. So when you see me, you see Irene and Clifton West. And I'll never be one half of the human beings. That Dad is gone, but Mom is still here, strong as ever, you see. That I come from the chocolate side of Sacramento, California. Shiloh Baptist Church, Reverend Willie P. Cook, Deacon Hinton, Sarah Ray, my vacation Bible school teacher. Yeah. These folk mean the world to me. As fallible, frail, fallen human beings, they exemplify an integrity, honesty, decency, and generosity that I will never forget. So I begin with a sense of piety. And by piety, I do not mean blind obedience to dogma. I do not mean uncritical deference to doctrine. I mean a candid, unflinching acknowledgement of our dependence on those who came before and the way in which they have shaped our hearts, minds, bodies, and souls. Now, why is that important? And Brother Robbie's the same way. I mean, his parents are just gems, coming out of West Virginia. And can you imagine? West Virginia, vanilla brother, California, chocolate brother. And yet finding that common humanity. But the important thing is you begin with a note of humility. And humility is not false modesty. Humility is a form of aspiring to spiritual maturity. That no one of us are self-made. Now we've got this myth circulating oftentimes in America. I'm self-made. I guess you gave birth to yourself too. I guess you taught yourself your own private language that nobody else knows. You made it all on your own. Please, get off the symbolic crack pipe. Get a sense of reality. What does it mean to be human? We know our English word human comes from the Latin humando. Humando means what? Burial. We're all on our way to burial. We're featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creatures born between urine and feces. That's what you look like when you don't have your uniforms on. You're human. And soon your bodies will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms. That's humbling. And that pushes back that proclivity that we all have toward hubris and arrogance and not acknowledging our blindnesses, not acknowledging our inadequacies, not acknowledging the things that we miss. And all of us have inadequacies and blind spots. That's another reason why we need each other. But I also come from a tradition of black people who have been so chronically hated for over 400 years, and yet at our best taught the world so much about love and how to love. I could just turn on John Coltrane's Love Supreme and sit back and let you listen to it. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, the love shot through every nook and cranny of the notes and the silences between the notes. I could read from James Baldwin's essays, love-soaked essays. Love forces us to take off the mask we know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. Martin Luther King Jr., love warrior to the core. Stevie Wonder, love and need of love. Have we ever had a character on the American stage like Mama in a Raisin in the Sun? Written by a genius from the south side of Chicago named Lorraine Hansberry. What is it about the best of these people, after being hated, terrorized, and traumatized for 400 years, still dishing out these love warriors? And those are just the major ones. We haven't got to my aunts and uncles yet. I haven't got to some of my friends. Now, I grew up with some gangsters too. I don't want to mislead you, because there's a lot of history of black gangsters and black thugs. And I was a gangster before I met Jesus. I'm just a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities right now. So when I call somebody a gangster, that's not name calling. I'm talking about something inside of me. I call somebody a thug, that's not finger pointing. I'm talking about something inside of me, that civil war that takes place on the battlefield of our own souls every day. And that's also what connects our humanity together. Now, what is it about love? Love of truth. No one of us possess truth. Quest for love of truth. The condition of truth to allow suffering to speak in our hearts and minds, in our neighborhoods, our hoods, our communities, our nation, as a species, allowing suffering to speak. That's why the anthem of black people is lift every voice. Want to hear every voice. Not just black ones, not just white ones, red ones, yellow ones, brown ones, women, gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual. Let's hear the voices. We got something to learn. We're going to disagree. Let's hear the voice. You can't be a blues woman if you don't find your voice. Thank you, Bessie Smith. You can't be a jazz man if you don't find your voice. Thank you, Art Tatum. But this is a matter of not just arts and music, but it takes us to the heart of what it is to have character and to be a leader. The art of living, in which love of truth, love of goodness, love of beauty, and for religious persons like ourselves, and we happen also to be Christians, love of God at the center. Well, what is love? But love is a form of death. And it's easier to speak to this audience than it is at Haverford College, Swarthmore, and other places that we've been, because you all aspire to be warriors. See, the folk in the outside of the military world, they don't have a warrior ethos. And I commit myself to being a warrior. I've been on the battlefield all my life trying to hold up a bloodstained banner of love. And justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And you have to battle. You have to be courageous. You have to have fortitude, diffusion of courage and greatness of character, diffusion of courage and magnanimity, fortitude. That's very different from other sectors in our society, because most so often it's just a matter of getting over by any means, or obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Because in a moment of escalating spiritual blackout, it's just a matter of getting over success, image, spectacle, status, money. Get there any way you can. What about the process? What about your character? What does it mean to be a human being in that quest? That's less important now. I just want center stage. Oh, how empty. Oh, how vacuous. More and more pervasive in our society. But if love is a form of death, so when Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living, and Malcolm X adds the examined life is painful, it's one willing to be unsettled, and to be unnerved and even unhoused in one's quest for truth and goodness and beauty. And that's coming from my own Christian tradition, where Paul tells Christians, die every day, because there's no maturation of character, of self, of soul, without something dying for something to be reborn. Plato said philosophy itself was a meditation in preparation for death. Montaigne, probably the greatest of all of the early Christian, early Catholic philosophers, said to philosophize is to learn how to die. And Seneca, and we don't expect too much philosophical profundity from the Romans. You say we're so busy running an empire. But Seneca's got something to say. He or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. What does it mean to learn how to die? It means to courageously examine yourself, painfully scrutinize yourself so that a new self can be in the making. It will be continuous with the old self, but something new will take place. Breakthroughs will take place. Metamorphosis can take place. So when you do call into question a certain assumption that you have or a certain presupposition you are holding on to and push it aside, that's a form of death. And that's what Brother Robbie was talking about in terms of paideia, deep education. When the students graduate from this dear place, engaged in paideia, one of the great questions to ask in uniform, how much did you die here in order to learn how to live in the larger world, to put integrity first, service before self, excellence in all things. There is no breakthroughs, just like romantic love. That when you deeply, genuinely fall in love, something inside of you dies at the same time something inside of you comes alive, and your egoistic, narcissistic self is pushed at least partially to the edge, and you become entangled with another self with a smile on your face for at least a few months. Because Sappho reminds us of bittersweetness in love. But the question is, are you willing to undergo that kind of deep transformation? And that's what I love about my dear brother Robbie, because we've been able to undergo a variety of different kinds of transformation in dialogue. And it's not just chit-chat. It's taking each other so seriously we give each other the benefit of being wrong as well as right, and still love each other, wrestle with each other, embark on common projects, and then decide to disagree on other issues. And we are deep need of that in this country, in this world. But every generation always looking for exemplary institutions, exemplary movements, exemplary individuals who are trying to enact and embody an integrity, honesty, decency, and generosity manifest in relation, interaction, conversation with a variety of different persons. And the goal is always what? The goal is always bigger than ourselves. The goal is truth, goodness, beauty, and for some of us, the holy. And we all fail. Fail again, try again, fail better, Samuel Beckett says. try again, fail better. We all end up falling short, and yet we can make so much movement forward if we have enough courage and fortitude to do so. And I'm sorry to go on maybe too long there, but we'll open up for things. Yeah, definitely.
Dr. George and Dr. West, thank you very much for your presentation. I thought particularly your words about having your beliefs challenged and being willing to listen to other beliefs was particularly influential to the cadet wing as we seek to develop better officers and leaders of character. At this time, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to step up to the mics that we have around the room and ask your questions to Dr. George and Dr. West. I will announce the last question as we approach 2 minutes remaining.
Are you able to hear, Cornell?
The first question, if we want to start, start on the right.
Cadet First Class Lucas Hernandez from CS29. Now my question is about belief. So Dr. George, you talked about how belief is what drives us. Now there are certain situations where we might see two different beliefs in regard to one topic. And if we see just as much truth in both of those beliefs as we do see fault, what's to stop us from becoming apathetic?
Well, if you see just as much, you're even Steven.
Right.
You can't decide between the two. You either make a leap of faith, which Cornell would be more sympathetic to than I would be. I'm sort of an Aristotelian Thomist in my philosophy. I know you've got a great philosophy department here, so some of you will know what I'm talking about when I describe myself as an Aristotelian Thomist. And Cornell's more of a Kierkegaardian, so the idea of a leap of faith is something more congenial to him than it is to me. But I think if you really just can't make up your mind about an issue, I would avoid acting on it unless it's absolutely necessary for you. There's no way out of making a decision on it. But that will not be the norm. The norm will be that you'll be persuaded, or more persuaded, by one side of the argument rather than the other. And so you'll act on it. You'll have good reasons to act on it because it is what you believe. It's where you think the weight of evidence, the weight of argument, the weight of reason, where it is. My plea is not that you should not act. I think you should act. It's that even in acting, you should remain open to the possibility that you're wrong, which means being open to dialogue, to discussion with people who think you are wrong, people who think that the weight of evidence and argument is on the other side, but who, like you, are willing to enter into dialogue with someone with whom they disagree. And it might be that you change your mind. Some great heroes of some great movements are people who began on one side of the debate, sometimes working feverishly, fervently for that side, who ended up flipping because of conversations, because of thinking, because of reading, because of dialogue, and ended up still in the fight, but on the other side of the battle. They followed the argument where it led, at least in their own heads, and they refused to become dogmatic even about a cause that they, at one time at least, believed in. Cornell, do you want to say anything about that?
No, I think I agree with you. I think oftentimes the most fundamental decisions that we make in life, when we turn to the evidence, and we ought to try to bring together as much evidence as we can, but the evidence determines our choice. And so other elements play a role. It's not often the case that the evidence is so overwhelming that you cannot but make a certain kind of choice. And if the evidence is underdetermined, then it can go in a variety of different ways. And it's there where the normative elements will play an important role, not just the descriptive ones having to do with what the facts are, what the data actually.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Cadet Fourth Class Neil. I know that many of us here at the Air Force Academy, and I think in the Air Force and across the service academies, I think that many of us are working hard to perpetuate a climate and culture of dignity and respect for one another, and that's no easy task. So I would like to know how you all prepare yourselves to enter into a conversation about something that weighty with someone who's already biased against what you have to say.
Well, that's a very, very important question. You don't begin from nowhere or from some Archimedean point outside the debate. Cornell said a bit about his own biography, about what he comes out of, where he began. I didn't say as much, but obviously I come out of a tradition as well, and that's kind of where you begin. It might not be where you end up, although it'll always leave some DNA markers, I think. One of the things that Cornell and I share is a deep belief and commitment to the idea that each and every member of the human family is a bearer of profound and inherent dignity.
Absolutely.
Each of us bears a profound and inherent and an equal dignity. Human beings are inestimably important, not just as a species, but in each individual instantiation. We believe that. We believe not only that human beings are important, but that they are equally important. That's the foundation of the belief in equal rights. It's expressed in the Declaration of Independence in the famous words that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't treat different people differently. You have certain obligations to your own children that you don't have to other children. You can recognize that all children are fundamentally equal in worth and dignity while recognizing your special responsibilities to your children or to your community or to your country. But in recognizing those obligations to your children and your community and your country, we mustn't be misled into supposing that we can treat other people's children or other communities or the people of other parts of the world as somehow inferior or lacking in dignity or expendable, or people we can treat as pure instrumentalities, as instruments, as things rather than as persons. And in both of our cases, this belief in the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of the human being happens to be supported by a religious conviction. Now, this won't be true for everybody. There are people who believe in the profound and inherent and equal dignity of all members of the human family who don't have this religious conviction. But the religious conviction that supports that belief in both of our cases is the belief that the human person, though fashioned from the mere dust of the earth, is nevertheless made in the very image and likeness of the divine creator and ruler of the universe. That gives us a very special reason to believe that it is our duty to honor the profound, inherent, and equal dignity of each and every member of the human family. Now, that commitment will get us on the path to doing virtuous things, but it will not decide all the important ethical questions. It's not always clear what is required in view of a commitment to the inherent and equal dignity of all members of the human family, or to each and every human being made in the image and likeness of God. Sometimes reasonable people of goodwill will come to radically different views about what a recognition of human dignity, in this case or that case, requires. And the best we can do is to debate those things. But we, I think, have an obligation to truth itself, an obligation to treat our interlocutor with respect and dignity, recognize his or her humanity, even in disagreeing, being willing to listen and learn despite the disagreement. But at the same time, and this goes to your question finally, at the same time, we have a right, and I would even say a duty, to demand that our interlocutors treat us and those who share our convictions with dignity. We have a right to demand that just as we are willing to listen with a truly open mind and a spirit of intellectual humility to them, they have an obligation to listen to us. You don't have an obligation to beat your head against the wall. If you have an interlocutor who is a dogmatist, who simply will not treat this occasion of dialogue or debate as anything other than a battleground where the goal is victory, not truth. You have no obligation to remain in that conversation. Very rarely will you ever hear Robbie George say, step away from a conversation. Cornell knows that. I mean, I want to stay in the conversation as long as possible. I want to urge my students and all of you young men and women to stay in the conversation as long as possible. But at a certain point, if the door is shut in your face, if there's no real truth-seeking conversation to be had with this guy, Cornell faced a Nazi at Charlottesville, face-to-face this close. That Nazi wasn't interested in having a conversation. So there was no real possibility of a serious truth-seeking conversation. Well, then I think you can step away from that. But I think appealing to your interlocutors, if there's any hope at all, appealing to your interlocutor's own inherent, deep down, maybe obscured, maybe covered up with a lot of stuff, desire for truth is not only legitimate, but is necessary. It's something you have an obligation to do. If you've got an interlocutor who's not that Nazi, who hasn't completely shut the door, appeal to something in him, that desire for truth that he has somewhere down there, just as you have and I have.
Absolutely.
Appeal to him to try to open him to listening to what you have to say, even as you listen to what he has to say. And institutions, including the Air Force Academy, and I recognize that our military academies have special obligations and special circumstances, just as religiously founded colleges and universities have special obligations and special circumstances. But I say even to our military academies and even to our religiously affiliated colleges and universities, don't draw the lines too closely in about what is discussable and not discussable on our campus. Make sure that there's plenty of room for the kind of exploration, the kinds of conversations that are necessary if we're to be leaders of examined lives. Let's not fear that encouraging or permitting deep examination of fundamental values, including those on which the academies are based, will undermine the commitment of our young men and women. I believe it will not. And I think there's every reason to encourage our young men and women to explore even the deepest issues, raising questions all the way along about whether we are on the right path. Absolutely. Cornell, you should speak to that.
No, but just briefly, that's such an important question, that if we have a strong predilection to find some common ground, there's got to be some convergence so that we can loosen the potential disagreement. When Brother Robbie was talking about the love of truth, there must be some persons in your life you love. I have persons in my life I love. Let's talk about that love, even though we can hardly talk about anything else. Let's talk about Disneyland. Let's talk about Prince. The role of the arts. How is it that humor, music, plays, stories, poems somehow embrace us across these political ideological lines such that we can see something that we have in common? Now, a lot of it would depend on what the context of the one-to-one dialogue is, what the one-to-one conversation is. But there's got to be some hook so that once persons can see that we have something in common, maybe we might be able to grow together in our quest for truth, even as we have profound disagreements, come from very different contexts, come from very different neighborhoods, parts of the country, parts of the city, and so forth and so on. But does that make sense still, brother?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank you all for coming. I'm Second Lieutenant Rico Hilliard, and Dr. West, I've been reading your book, and from the preface of 2001, if I can read a small excerpt that's at the end of the text of the chapter, you state that if pro-democracy movements weaken and citizens and workers become more fearful, race matters will explode. And we know the ugly cycle this will yield. We must do better. So as being a poli-sci major, one of the things I learned about pro-democracy, or what democracy is, it's free elections, it's fair and equal elections. It's
Absolutely.
having the right to protest. with some of the contentious things we see currently within our society, when we think of other countries maybe infringing on our elections, or we think of people protesting in sports, what does that have to say about race relations today? And what must we do as leaders, both in the Air Force, maybe in the private sector, maybe in the classroom, to build race relations and also build our society all together?
Well, I appreciate the question, though, and I appreciate you reminding me of the words, because I had forgotten I'd written it. That's a long time ago. Definitely. I appreciate that. But I mean, Brother Robbie and I are so fundamentally committed to the protection of liberties and rights. This is one of the benchmarks of a civilized society, which means you have to fight for the right for persons who disagree. Take somebody like Rush Limbaugh. I fight for his right to be wrong most of the time. You see? But he's got a right to be wrong. It's just if he engages in injurious harm, then that's something else. You see? And similarly so in terms of leftist comrades, liberal comrades, or whatever, whoever they are. And when we reach the point where we can't even express ourselves, let alone learn and listen to each other, then we're on the way to an authoritarian regime. And then you begin to see neo-fascist stirrings, the scapegoating of the most vulnerable, the undercutting of rule of law, the delegitimating of democratic process, and the turn to military rule. Now see, the history of the United States is one in which we have been really quite fortunate, even given all the structural faults. What happened to indigenous peoples, slavery, domestic households where women confined to patriarchal private spaces, not able to gain access to public life and education and what have you. All of those flaws we could talk about, we've been able to hold back from any kind of neo-fascist rule. But it doesn't mean that America could not still go neo-fascist. If we get so weak in our soul craft that our statescraft becomes authoritarian, then that chaos that we're talking about is not just a matter of race matters, but it's a matter of integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, public life, having any vitality and vibrancy. That's the real challenge. So anytime you're talking about race, you're not just talking about some ghettoized subject over on the side. You're talking about what kind of society connected to, committed to integrity, honesty, and decency are we talking about? I say the same thing about gender. I'd say the same thing about homophobia and transphobia. You see, these are moral and spiritual issues. They're not marginal political policies. What kind of persons do we want to be? What kind of nation do we want to be? Now, we can argue about what particular kind of policies would follow from a commitment to integrity, honesty, and decency. But once you lose the basic stuff, and that's what I was trying to get at in 2001. Now, I was much more hopeful in 2001. Nowadays, I'm holding on to Jesus, a little cognac, and my mama's prayer. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm just being honest with you. I'm right on the edge. You know what I mean? Alexis will tell you, my beloved will tell you, I'm right on the edge because we're in deep trouble. It's not because of Brother Trump. I mean, a lot of people want to isolate Trump as this so-and-so. No. He's not. He's an individual. He's expressing something that's been inside of large numbers of our fellow citizens, and it's complicated. It's not just one issue or one dimension of who he is. Now, he's got a tremendous amount of problems. We won't go into that at the moment. He's not a shining example of integrity, let's just put it that way. But the point is, it's not a matter of fetishizing one individual. It says something about who we are as a larger society. As you know, I was very critical of my dear brother Barack Obama, because I don't believe in tribal connection trumping commitment to moral and spiritual integrity. If he did something wrong, we got to go, no, don't say a word about it because he's black. What you talking about? I've been critical of black folk ever since I came out of the ghetto. I got morality. I got spirituality. If it's wrong, it's wrong. I don't care what color they are. I don't care what gender they are. If it's right, it's right. So that this issue is a much larger one, and I think the way in which you characterize it is a good way of opening us up so that all of us can participate and try to be better and undergo this kind of maturation, or what I would call a kind of step-by-step rebirth.
Quick word on it, if I may. First, thank you for reminding us of those very prophetic words from 2001 from Brother Cornell's great book. Secondly, I want to reinforce what Cornell said about his own witness. People who hear what he says about President Trump need to remember that he was every bit as strongly critical, every bit as harshly critical of President Obama. And he's got those arrows you see sticking out of him. Those are arrows that he's taken from his criticisms of presidents going back as far as I recall Cornell commenting on public affairs. And I also want to reinforce his point about identitarianism. One of the dangers here is that we'll fall into a national politics of identity politics. We already see it too much on our campuses and in elite circles. It's becoming a national phenomenon. I think much of what went on in the last election on both sides showed how deeply we've fallen into identitarianism. When Cornell points to his own skin and says, look, it's not the color of my skin that makes me support somebody or oppose somebody. It's what they are doing and whether it's right or wrong.
That's right.
We have to remind ourselves of that. We're in a grave danger right at this particular point in our history of falling into a kind of tribalism. And if we do that, one of the signs will be we're never going to see anybody else as having a legitimate complaint. If we fall into tribalism, you'll know it, because we will think, if we are on the left, the Trump voters are just bigots, they're just evil people, they had no legitimate complaints, they had no reason to vote for him, they're deplorable. Or people on the right saying, these people who are complaining about police abuse, about black men being shot, black men being stopped when white men aren't in driving their cars and so forth, there's no validity to those complaints. They're just complaining. That's just a race thing. You'll know when you start to see that, no recognition of any validity in the other side's complaint, that we've fallen into a kind of tribalism which is absolutely incompatible with the concept of e pluribus unum. This country only works when that motto, that Latin motto, from many we make ourselves one, this country only works when that motto is not just a formal set of words, but it actually lives in the hearts and souls of us as individuals and of us as communities and as us of a nation. We cannot survive the collapse of e pluribus unum. It won't be America. I don't know what it'll be. It won't be this country.